Oh, yes, he's there now.
Yeah.
Right.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir.
People are talking.
Okay,
Yeah.
how are you, sir?
Okay. May I request you all that except Rasputa Saab, you all please keep your audio on the mute. That means keep it red. And then it will all otherwise will disturb. Good evening, sir. If you want, we can begin, sir. Can you hear me? Not full screen, by the way. Rasputra Saab. Yeah, Rasputra Saab's video is on. Yeah,
Ambassador, am I
yeah,
talking?
good evening, sir. Now I can hear you.
I don't know, a number of other people.
Yeah, I can hear you now, sir. Okay. Now we can begin, sir. Let people drop in as they come. Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you, but your voice is a bit rattled. What is wrong?
I think others can. Yeah, others are able to hear. I don't know. Maybe something to do with the sound system.
Sound system.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for. I can see my former boss, MS Arman Singh. How are you, sir?
Fine, thank you.
Yes, I can see. I can see him having some coffee. MS Arman Singh.
I can see you very clearly, but your problem is with your voice, I think, a little bit.
Let's come close as possible, sir. Let's see. Well, thank you very much for coming on this rainy evening. We have been reading a lot about India-China relations since the Galwan Valley standoff and the brutal killing of Indian soldiers. So I thought go back to somebody who has seen it all since 1948. Even when China, as we know, China was not even born. I will throw at some of the narratives, which we can call it busting the myths. Can you hear me, sir, now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, but it's the voice again. But we'll go ahead. I think we'll see.
Oh, sir. Now, the first question I will ask you, sir. The 1950s, the general impression is that people accuse that Pandit Nehru foolishly turned down US offer of permanent seat to United Nations Security Council and paid it for China. Now, is this impression based on simply rumors and gossips, or was there ever, as per information, any formal offer from United States?
Well, is it my turn or somebody else there?
No, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead. You are the only person who will speak, sir.
You know, Ambassador, there is no evidence, archival or some other authentic piece of information about this. This is pure myth. No offer was ever made. I think somebody from the press might have asked Panditji a question, and he said, well, I'm not interested. Why should I take China's seat for India? If we get a seat on our own, then it's a fair offer. But there was no offer. My short answer is there was no offer. There is no archival or evidence for any kind of an offer. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Mrs. Pandit has mentioned to a couple of people that there was no offer, no such offer.
Well, the other question arises in the media, television studios. People always say Deputy Prime Minister Sardar Patel wrote a long letter to Prime Minister Nehru, cautioning him against China. And we also hear that Sir Birja Shankar Vajpayee also cautioned against him. Now, do you think Nehruji was so naive that he could not foresee danger from China? Because there are some statements attributed to him that, like Prime Minister Modi, he also called China an expansionist country. He also, I think in 1957 in Lok Sabha said that we shouldn't trust China. If that is a view, how could Pandit Nehru not heed the advice given by so many people? He comes out by his critics as some kind of bully-eyed romantic, others were realists. What is your impression about it?
Well, I am aware of Sardar Patel's letter. I am also in the know that the letter was drafted by Sir Birja Shankar Vajpayee, who was Secretary General in the Ministry of External Affairs. You see, they were warning him about Tibet. Well, I believe he was sufficiently warned about Tibet. What could he do? The army had just been splintered. Part of it was engaged in Kashmir. And what is important, no other government was willing to commit the troops or take some other step to accord international recognition of that. What could
Prakash, put your mic on
he was uh, caution in this matter, which I think was a good policy.
So it was only because of his obsession with this idea of pan-Asian solidarity. Recently, M.J. Akbar in an article said as early as 1925, when he attended the first interest conference in Brussels, Nehruji was still rooting for pan-Asian solidarity.
Well, he was not obsessed with anything. I think he was a very wise man. He looked at issues from all the various angles and he explored possibilities. Now, Tibet was not ours, never in history. China now and then had occupied Tibet and treated it as an integral part of larger China, expanded China. China is an expansionist power. India is not an expansionist power. And I don't think we, after independence, in our situation, economic situation, military situation, we could have maintained any kind of a presence in Tibet. It's a practical policy, pragmatic policy.
Another issue on which he is criticized vehemently in the media and various books and articles is the issue of Tibet. People say he foolishly removed the buffer which we had. 1954 sealed Tibet's fate. But I think so many people have written that perhaps he didn't have any option. I think I read some article by Manoj Joshi. He said as early as 1949, when he asked General Cariappa, who later on became Field Marshal, that can India intervene in Tibet? And General Cariappa emphatically said no. He said, maximum I can spare only 1 battalion. 1 battalion is hardly less than 1,000 soldiers. Similarly, Ranjit Kala in his book said that, look, intervention in Tibet at that time must have been very hazardous. Without the US and British support, there was whole idea of intervention was something very imagination. What is your personal opinion, sir?
As you see, I was around in those days. To imagine that we could have sustained a military presence or other civil presence in Tibet, I think a dream. Now, you mentioned the United States and Britain. Neither country was willing to recognize Tibet. Neither country was willing to take up Tibet's entry into the United Nations. I'll bit of information. I think 1950, Nehru has twice sent emissaries
Hmm.
to Lhasa to urge, persuade, suggest to the authorities in Lhasa that they should consider making an application for membership for the United Nations. And if they did that, Nehru had said that possibly India could help. Now, Tibetans just ignored his people he had sent there to talk to them of the suggestion he made. Now, once the Chinese army had moved in, Nehru was a practical man, pragmatic person. He recognized that Tibet was now part of China, and they could nothing. India could do nothing about it.
Before Prakash, I think your mic is not on mute. You please press it should become red. Some disturbance. The mic of Colonel Rastogi and Prakash are not on mute. Please press and make it red. So now let's come to 1962.
Yes.
Now people, so many books have been written that it was B.M. Paul's idea to Nehru that forward policy throughout the Chinese which provoked China to invade India. But there are many people who believe, including our two colleagues, Shankar Menon and Shyam Saran, they say forward policy and no forward policy. China would have invaded India in any case because Mao was determined to cut Nehru to size and humiliate India. Did you also get that impression at that time?
Well, I think Shyam Saran is right and Shankar Menon, they are both right, that Zhou Enlai, not Zhou Enlai, his boss, decided to bring Nehru down a peg or two, or to teach Nehru a lesson. In 1958, I remember I met I think during a visit to Nepal, the former Prime Minister of Nepal, Mr. Thapa was his name. He had been to Lhasa recently. He had met Mao. He had met Chao. He told me that Mao had said to him that Nehru is getting too big. I am going to teach him a lesson. But there is another factor. You see, after 1949, when we gave asylum to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I think that they treated it as a very grave provocation. Though they made sweet noises, well, you can keep him, maybe he'll be happy there, and we are close friends, and that kind of conversation went on between the two countries. But I think they took it as a provocation and started making serious preparation for an assault in India in 1962.
Well, sir, in spite of the debacle of 1962, it was Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, who decided to send an ambassador, I think it was Mr. K.R. Narayanan, after a gap of 14, 15 years. And again,
good policy requires engagement with all neighbors. For several years, we didn't have an ambassador there. They didn't have an ambassador there. So how do you carry on, get engaged with a neighbor, an important neighbor, big neighbor? So I think looking at the issue from various angles, Indira Gandhi decided that it was time to send an ambassador there and start some kind of a conversation. You remember perhaps, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Chinese foreign minister had already paid a visit to India, to which we had not made a return yet. So I think it was a wise thing to do to restore the ambassadorial relationship between the two.
Sir, Indira Gandhi's son, Rajiv Gandhi, who went to China as Prime Minister, I think a gap of 34 years. And it is said that he and the old Chinese supreme leader, Deng Xiaoping, he offered some kind of, or he hinted at some kind of swap, that India gives up claim in eastern sector, they can give up claim in western sector. Now, some scholars have said that Rajiv Gandhi didn't follow it up, otherwise things could have been different. Did you get any impression that time it was some kind of serious offer?
No, this thing has been bandied about. Zhou Enlai is supposed to have made an offer. He didn't make an offer. He made a public statement in Calcutta that, we can exchange, make an exchange and that sort of thing. There was some detail to it. Deng Xiaoping had mentioned the same thing to G. Parthasarathi when he led a delegation there. But he said, in addition, he said, if anybody thinks, these were his words, if anybody thinks that China is going to make an agreement on the basis of that line drawn by the British, that is not going to happen. And there are areas in which we are interested. There may be some small areas in which you are interested. We can go over these things, but they never came up with a proper written proposal on the subject.
So in 1989, the GDP of India and China was almost on par. But now 40 years down the line, Chinese economy is 4 times bigger than India. They have foreign exchange reserves of 4 trillion, which is more than our entire GDP. They are the second largest economy. They are the largest manufacturer, the largest exporter. And certainly they are asserting themselves, asserting aggressively. And a lot of it is written about China's aggressiveness, assertiveness. Now, if you look back and take historical view, have the US or UK, when they were at the threshold of becoming #1 power in the world, did they behave differently? Did they not behave aggressively, assertively, as China is doing now?
No, it's going to take China a long time to become #1 power. Well, they took strides, the economic sphere. They have a very large army. They have missiles, nuclear weapon power. But I think for the next 25 years, next 50 years, the United States is going to remain #1 military power and possibly also economic. We'll wait and see. We have to do our own act to strengthen our economy. We have been very lackadaisical about this. I went to China in 1985. I had retired from government service. I saw the infrastructure being laid in the Shenzhen area. Or the establishment of a huge number of factories in a variety of goods. I came back and wrote 3 articles. They were published in the Hindustan Times. My conclusion was that China will, in the matter of a couple of decades, very powerful economic power. There are lessons for us to be drawn. Nobody took notice of this till several years later when Rajiv Gandhi spoke to me about it.
There's a lot of disturbance. I think some of your
known about this. I think we
are
deal
still
with
on
China. You see, we have our inherent economic strength. China has followed a predatory trade policy, exploited our markets without giving us access, sufficient access to their own markets for our goods. We have some of our own affairs. Look at the pros and cons of dealing with economic matters generally, but also especially in trade matters. I'll give you an example. APIs on which pharmaceutical industry developed. 25 years ago, met all our needs ourselves, exported also APIs. Chinese then noticed this and they bought some APIs from us and they started producing and sending those same APIs back to us on the prices and asked us to come and sell for this. And today, we are in a difficult situation. I think we must produce APIs for the entire need of our pharmaceutical industries. We can do it. It will take 5 to 10 years, and I think we should start doing the whatever is necessary about it.
Before I next, please, once more, I request all of you put your audio on the mute. That means this audio should be look red color. Some of you are talking, disturbing the whole conversation. Sir, in 2017, during the Doklam crisis, Chinese was surprised by India's very strong stand. India stood firm and they backed down. Similarly, in Galwan Valley, I think Chinese underestimated our response. Though initially they killed about 20 soldiers, but I think Bihar regimentally acquitted itself very well. They have never given the figure. But most of people believe that Indians perhaps killed double the number of the Chinese soldiers. After that, we have been holding these discussions of disengagement leading to de-escalation. It may take a long time. But even if they succeed long time, do you think China is really going to go back to status quo ante? That means May 5, 2020. So every time what in the press they say, I think some people are salami slicing. Every time they come forward, withdraw in the process, they really nibble on our territory. Do you think China is really going back to status quo ante?
You know, I think, Ambassador, we haven't given enough thought to this matter. China has had an interest in Jammu and Kashmir, sustained interest over a period of time, especially in the Ladakh area, where they want to extend their reach so that they have a broader communication link between Tibet and Xinjiang. So there has been, it's not only Islami slicing. They occupied when we didn't realize what was going on. They built a road there. Then they defined a certain line which they said was their line of claim. And they have come beyond that line during these years. Some time ago, 1963 actually, they got a portion of J&K from Pakistan. They are now well established in the northern areas where they're building all kinds of things. What is that called? CP.
Pakistan-China Economic Corridor.
Yes, corridor. Their armed force people are present there in the guise of builders of projects and so on and so forth. My fear is, if we are not careful, there is a design they have of extending their reach in the northern parts of Ladakh and link up with Pakistan. Only one Indian ambassador to China, Nalin Suri, has recently written about this matter in a major article in one of the papers. I forget which paper. This is China recently, instead of waiting for Pakistan to try to raise the Kashmir issue in the Security Council and the General Assembly of the United Nations about this, the action we took to abrogate the 370 and measures we implemented to integrate the Kashmir, the whole of Kashmir. more closely in India. Uh, Not Pakistan, but China was trying to raise this issue in the Security Council.
Yes.
China's interest in Jammu and Kashmir, especially in the Ladakh region, is very large, very extensive. We have not paid enough attention to this, so we must stop them where they are now. Now, to another aspect of this, I want to bring to your attention. I think the Chennai summit did not go too well. I think at that summit, uh, Mr. Xi read out or proposed some red lines from his point of view. CPEC and BRI. India should support it. Now, our Prime Minister has already explained his views at length why we cannot do this. And I guess Prime Minister Modi told him that this was not on. This is a reason behind, one of the reasons behind this concerted attack on advance on 5 or 6 places. Galwan Valley is one, Depsong is another. There are, and those 6 fingers, northern coast of the lake, and 1 or 2 others. It's a very calculated sort of response to the rejection of Xi's red lines by the Indian Prime Minister. I think our Prime Minister was right in doing so. And well, if we have to face the consequences, I think we will. We have shown it to them that we are ready. We should never, lower our guard in this area. We did have we had lowered our guard. Otherwise, how did they get into these areas? We should have woken up earlier and stopped them when they started.
Well, don't you think that all said and done, Prime Minister Modi has provided a very strong, resolute, and firm leadership during this crisis? He has given free hand to military to take whatever action is appropriate on the border. Then infrastructure is far better, though it is not as good as Chinese side. Now you can see our Sukhoi 30, MiG-29, Mirage 200, and Apache helicopters all piercing the silence of valley. So we have in symbolic terms shown to China that this is not 1962. If you want to fight, you will have to really have a very tough time dealing with India. And I think his other actions like symbolic term, calling China Bistarwadi, expansionist, or really implementing these ban on 59 Chinese apps. Now, symbolic term, these are things which resonate with many other countries. And I think this has been a smart move. In the long run, dealing with China is very, very tedious issue. It's not going to be resolved in a few months or few years, but we seem to be on the right track.
Well, I think militarily speaking, we can hold our end. We are strong enough now. We are not India of 1962. And I think recent measures that the Prime Minister has taken, the army has taken, will strengthen our position there. I think in the whole of J&K, in that frontier, western frontier, even eastern frontier, I think we are strong enough to keep China at bay. Our army is good. It's being equipped properly, and some successful sort of measures have already been implemented. Others are on the way. As you mentioned, the Air Force is being strengthened for any eventuality in Ladakh or any other area. So, generally people say, you know, China's army is much stronger than Indian army. China's army is larger. Fair enough. How much of this army can they put in Tibet? I think that we can match them man to man, tank to tank, gun to gun, missile to missile. So I'm not worried on that, but I think we should always be alert. How do we allow we sort of that allow they're walking in some of these areas and half a dozen areas at one time.
Well, sir, so-called the China expert keep so many suggestions and advices. Somebody says we should use Tibet card, we should use Taiwan card, we should use Hong Kong card, we should use Xinjiang card, and all kind of cards people want India to use to make things difficult for China. Now, how practical it is to really use any of these cards, whether Tibet card, Taiwan card, Hong Kong card, Xinjiang card, in your view?
What card? What cards are you talking of?
Our China experts said we must raise these issues which will sort of at least displease Chinese. It might create problem for them. Like I read one of the suggestions. Somebody wrote, I think, I Hajra Economic Time, says next Republic Day we must invite Dalai Lama as the chief guest.
Well,
Somebody's
look, see, Ambassador, I mean, we should do our trade with Taiwan. We are doing that. So this card is already there. The Chinese know about it. The whole world knows about it. Hong Kong, in my view, is no card for India to hold even in its pocket. The real card is the strength, armed forces strength that you can put together on our frontiers. Wherever they are facing, we are facing China, and that's a big enough card. It's a very powerful card.
well, sir.
We should not listen. We should not. I mean, we should of course go on improving, strengthening our relations with the United States, with Europe, with Britain, and the Quad. We should expand our roles in the Quad. I think we should. We are being. There are some hesitancies of the past in that area still. I think those hesitations should be set aside now. I'm glad our foreign minister has spoken about this. Now, Quad is a card. Our relationship with the United States is a card. Our own developing economy and our developing military strength is a very powerful card. These are enough cards.
Well, sir, you said US is one of the cards. Now, you must have read in papers the current military joint exercises going in the South China Sea, Indian Ocean. So what is your reaction to these exercises which have been going on for several years? Now we are doing so close to Chinese waters.
Really?
And I'm sure it's not something China likes.
So yeah.
Could you hear my question, sir?
No, your last bit was not clear to me. We said going close to the.
I was saying that we are doing
South China Sea.
Yes, sir. South
Okay.
China Sea and Indian Ocean.
Now here, I'm glad you raised this. I want to, say something. We must not put everything on the northern frontier. China has a much sharper eye on the Indian Ocean. We should develop our naval strength, and there also it's a vast ocean. So many countries have interest in it. So many countries trade transits that ocean. So that's a very large region for cooperation with France, for example, with the United States, with Japan, particularly. Gain our guard on the northern frontier, but pay more attention. I personally think, we need a navy of a larger navy. We don't have we have a one carrier. That's not good enough. We need four carrier groups for the Indian Ocean. But navy takes a very long time to be built. You can't always go on buying ships and so on and so forth. We are building some. We are building nuclear submarines. We are building also a carrier. I think two. Navy's plan seems to be with three carriers. I don't think three carriers are enough. One carrier will always be in the docks, for repairs, maintenance, etc. And you have openings on the Indian Ocean on east, south, and west. So this is I think, a note of caution I want to mention. I don't think enough attention is being paid to this issue.
Taking a broader view, both countries can bring in 1,000 soldiers on each side. You bring all the tanks, you have these drones and whatever. And next time, if there is conflict, I'm sure it will go to much bloodier, much more casualties and death both sides. Do you think India-China border dispute can ever have a military solution? I think, sir, yes.
Can have what?
Can have a military solution. Can this issue, India-China border dispute?
I don't think China can afford to go to war with India, frankly. I don't think we want a war. I don't think China can really afford, but China will go on doing pinpricks, what they think is a soft Indian border or whatever. So I think we have to guard against that. We meet them wherever they try to push forward onto our side and push them back. So this will not lead to a war. I'm quite sure about that.
Well, sir,
my friend, Chinese respect power. And so long as you have power and you display it in dealing with China, I think China will begin to be a little more cautious in dealing with India. Some measures, economic measure that Prime Minister Modi has taken, banning those 59 apps, I think that's a good measure. We should then push in the direction of creating a balance between our exports to and imports from China. If it means some difficulty on our side, I think we should face those difficulties. And we should warn our businessmen. They work on greed, they work on profit. If China thinks China's if China's Banarsi silk saris are cheaper, they buy. Why do we buy those things? With China, Ganeshas are being made in China. The plastic figures of all our gods and goddesses of the Indian pantheon are being manufactured there, and our country is being flooded by these things. Why do we encourage China by importing these things from China?
But sir, who buys them? If you go Diwali time, all these massive shopping malls, the Chinese Lakshmis and Ganeshas are not bought by the poor ordinary people. They are all bought in hundreds by all the rich people who shop in these shopping malls.
Well, no comment.
Sir, with your 70 years of experience and having witnessed and participated in international relations, taking a broader perspective, what would be your advice for Indian foreign policy planners and practitioners? What is your advice for next 20, 25 years?
India's foreign policy in general, or of
yes,
the
sir.
border?
In general, in general, sir.
Pardon?
India's foreign policy in general, what is your advice for next 20, 30 years?
My thinking, I have been speaking, I've been writing is very clear. I think number one priority is strengthening, deepening, expanding our relationship with the United States of America. Number two, expanding our relationship with Europe, and in Europe, particularly with Germany, France, Britain. And deepening our relationship, military relationship, economic relationship, commercial trade, this, that, or this with Japan. I think that's very important. I have not mentioned Japan sufficiently in this discussion. Japan should be one of the top concerns, two top concerns. But Japan is a part of the Quad. It's a leader in the Quad. And we have been going slow on this. I think we are hesitating too much. We should now. This is not to say that we should not engage with China. We should remain engaged with China, but for our own security, economic security, military security, we should work with the Quad countries, that is United States, Japan, Australia, and also the Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia in particular, Thailand, to strengthen our position jointly with these countries in the Indian Ocean. This would be my thrust for Indian foreign policy for the next 25 years. People, you have been talking loosely that China will become number one power, technological power, military power. I leave the economy out for the time being. In this century, soon, I don't see that happening. I think China, United States will remain number one power for the next 25 years, certainly, possibly next 50 years. India will come up also as a power of some kind. China will continue to rise. China may become number one economic power, but once you are in 10 to 15 trillion dollar economy, 15 to 20 trillion dollars, if China is number one or America is number two, India is number three, I think these differentiations don't matter very much at that level.
Well, sir, thank you very much. We have some time. If you permit, I can ask my colleagues to ask some questions. Do you have time?
I have time if their voices come clear. I have a problem with your voice, sir.
Let's see. I see in the list of participants our friend from Chicago, Dr. Dennis Jorgensen on the line. Are you there? Dennis?
Chicago.
Okay. Now, I also see the name of our friend Shyam Saran, whom I have quoted. Shyam, are you there?
Shyam Saran, he is one of the gurus. He should not be asked.
In the name of the participant, I see his name. I don't know whether he's still there.
I'm here.
Shyam, if you are there, I quoted you, complimented you. Do you want to ask any question to Raskota Sahab?
Well, please let the others ask questions. I was here to listen to
Okay. Padanvaya sir, thank you very much for joining from Hyderabad. Do you want to ask something? We were together in London, Raskota Sahab.
Thank you, but Raskotra Sahab has covered all the points, especially the last one about what should be the foreign policy thrust for the coming 20-25 years. But I just wanted to ask him one thing. What do we do with Russia? What should be our relations with Russia?
Raskota Sahab.
What else? Can you repeat what he asked?
He said, what about our relation with Russia?
What about?
Russia, sir, Russian Federation.
Russia?
Russian Federation.
Yeah.
Russia, our relationship with Russia is good. We should keep it strong. I think Russians want it and we want it. The recent conversation between the two countries continuing with our, we don't have much trade with Russia, geographic difficulties, but we have a very strong military relationship, military goods we have. So So now Russia, I think the Americans have followed a policy which has pushed Russia into China's arms.
Yeah, I know.
I wish at some stage our Prime Minister will talk to the American president to relax on Russia. Then I think things can change.
Thank you. I think that was
Can
a.
I ask a question, Surendra Bhai? Can I ask a question?
Is that Vasuti?
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes,
I can't
Bhaswati
see you, but I will see when you ask question.
I would like to ask a question. Rasgotra Saab was my first ambassador and he's my guru. Sir, I wanted to ask you a question. Surendra Bhai had talked about the Taiwan card and other cards. You see, the point here is that if we upgrade our relationship with Taiwan, these TV experts say, as he was saying, that that would immensely annoy China. So what they are trying to say is that why don't we also take measures to annoy the Chinese? For example, single them out for human rights abuses, do a counter campaign, use the Taiwan card in the sense, upgrade it, etc. Because what these TV experts say is that since China does not believe in a one India policy, why does India believe in a one China policy? So I think that is what Surendra Bhai was asking, sir. It's an important question. We'd like to have your comments. Thank you. I hope I put it correctly, Surendra Bhai.
You know, as I do, we have a traditional policy on this matter. We have done enough to annoy China, and we are going to do more to annoy China. So far as Taiwan is concerned, we have certain relations there. They may be subterranean for the time being, but trade is going on between. Visits are taking place. I myself attended here in Delhi the visit of, I forget his name, that gentleman who was going to contest the presidential election.
In Taiwan.
Yes, in Taiwan. Not in India or America, but Taiwan certainly. So that kind of relationship has gone on for decades. And it has expanded a bit. I think we have some officer also stationed there now. Under guard.
Yeah, so many people have. Ranjit Gupta was there long back. I think Vinod Khanna was also there.
But I mean, provocation by, let's say, recognizing Taiwan, sending an ambassador there, why should we provoke China unnecessarily? That we should leave to the United States of America.
That's good policy. Now, I also see in the participant Mr. Sanjay Baru. Are you still there?
Who?
Sanjay Baru.
Sanjay Baru, what's wrong with him?
No, I saw his name there. I don't know whether he is still left. He is there.
He knows answers to all the questions.
That's why
Sir, I actually, I do have a question for you. You know,
now, yes, Mr. Baru, go ahead.
Yes.
I have been going on and on for the last couple of months criticizing the government's decision on walking out of these RCEP negotiations, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership negotiations. Because I take the view that if you believe in the Indo-Pacific, if you believe in Quad, if you believe in a strategic relationship with Japan, Australia, ASEAN, then we have to have an economic component as well. And RCEP is that. Somehow we have convinced ourselves that RCEP is a Chinese plot. It need not be. The Chinese may take advantage of us, but we can manage that. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on this, because this is again something, even the other day in Jaishankar's remarks on television, he once again defended the government decision not to join RCEP. I think it's a singularly wrong decision, but I'll be delighted to hear your views.
What's the question? I think it's a general statement of policy you have made, haven't you, Anja?
So I'm asking you about RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. What are your views, whether we should be part of that or not?
Part of what? RCEP?
Yes, RCEP, yes.
No, I think we walked out of it. That was the right decision, the right action. But we should have trade economic relations very extensive with each one of these countries. The way the Chinese have gone about that organization of RCEP, you see, our agriculture would be ruined. It will do a lot of damage to us in different ways. Why should we join in and, on that basis? China and India in these organizations should be maybe 60-40, if not entirely equal. But here, I mean, the role allotted to us was a very, very inferior one and very detrimental to Indian economy. So, have I answered your question?
You have answered my question, sir. I mean, that has been the government's view. But, my point is, how do you build a strategic relationship with this region if we are not more actively economically engaged with them? The region wants us. ASEAN wants us in RCEP. The Australians want us in RCEP.
Certainly. But in our own neighborhood, countries with which we have borders, Nepal, Bhutan, of course, we have very good relationship with Bangladesh. I think we should be more active. And certainly ASEAN countries, we should be doing much, much, much more. They have been expecting, they have been waiting for us, as the Singapore Prime Minister once said, for a long time. And we have kept them waiting. I don't know why. We should be, I agree with you, we should be more active in these areas.
I also seen the list, Ambassador Mansingh. Sir, are you still there?
Who?
Ambassador Mansingh.
Oh, what's wrong
yeah.
with him?
I think
I'm very much here.
He is one
sir,
of the gurus.
Sir, good evening. Would
Ah.
you like to make any comment, Ambassador Mansingh, sir?
He is
Yes,
one
sir.
of the gurus. But I'd like to hear his comment, whatever he has to say.
I have enjoyed your remarks, sir, but a couple of questions.
Thank
One
you.
is, the foreign minister, the external affairs minister just mentioned yesterday that the era of non-alignment is over. You have been in the thick of the non-aligned years. So you think this was a good decision to put an end to non-alignment? And I'm also a little confused about this concept of strategic autonomy. Could you give your views on what this strategic autonomy is and why we are promoting it?
My dear friend, in today's world, strategic autonomy is just a phrase. Which country has strategic autonomy today? In the realm of economy, in the realm of the military, or any other area. So I don't subscribe to that thesis. I know some people have been moaning about India losing its strategic autonomy because of having a stronger relationship with the United States. With Russia, we had such a close relationship. Did we lose our strategic autonomy? And why are we? We seem to lack in confidence when we talk that in terms of our losing strategic autonomy by having good relations, very expanded, deep relations, economic, military supplies, technology in particular, culture in all the various areas with the United States of America. As Prime Minister Vajpayee said, we are natural partners. I believe that I believe that a long time. I've spent 10 years in America. I see the similarities. We have had problems with that country because they got involved with Pakistan much more deeply than they were involved with us. But in our difficulties, they've helped us. And we needed food grains. We couldn't get it from anywhere else. They were very generous, very liberal in meeting our needs. And billions of dollars of aid has poured from this country, even when relations were not very close or very warm. So non-alignment, Ambassador, 1983, I had a part in handling that summit here. At the end of it, we had a discussion, in-house discussion. Indira Gandhi ji, Prime Minister, was there. I was there. Some 3-4 other people were there. And she asked me, what do you think is the future? I said to her very plainly, I said, ma'am, from what I've seen here in this 10, 15 days, the behavior of non-aligned countries vis-a-vis one another, there isn't much future. We had tried to give that summit an economic orientation, and that was sabotaged by the previous president, the
Castro.
I think Cuba.
Fidel Castro.
Yes, Cuba. And they came up in the old issues, Palestine, this, that, or the other, thumping the table and that kind of thing. So they were not interested in one area in which cooperation could have given a fillip and inspiration to the movement. And that has gone on. It's it. The movement exists. We are members of it. We should renew a membership and so on and so forth. But I have no great hopes on non-alignment. I think we should choose our course independently in developing our relations with Israel, for example.
Thank you, sir. That
Israel was always under attack.
Well, I'm glad
I
that
think that's very reassuring. Surendra, am I permitted a quick second question?
please go ahead.
What was the second question?
Sir, you are considered a guru in everything else, but you are
But you
considered
are also true.
you're a Mahaguru in Nepal. So
I
I
see.
want you to give us a sense of what is happening in Nepal.
Nepal Prime Minister says Ramchandra ji was not born in India. Ayodhya was not in.
Nepal is now being led by a communist prime minister who is not well disposed towards India. We are going to have some difficulties, but I think we should be prepared to, we should be prepared to live with these difficulties. Nepal, we have very strong bonds of, I say, put geography number one. No matter what China can do, what China wants to do or does it cannot replace India in certain ways. And I think the Nepalese, large body of Nepalese, elite and the others, they know this. So we should sort of calmly look at the situation, do what we can do with to help Nepal, and wait. Things will change. Better days will come. I have seen phases of great difficulties with Nepal, and both Nepal and India have jointly emerged out of those closer friends.
That's great.
Well, sir, we are coming to close.
Let me add one thing. I've dealt with Nepal. I've dealt with other neighbors, and I have come to the conclusion that our most difficult neighbor to deal with is Nepal. But this is not to say that we should sort of lose our enthusiasm for Indo-Nepal, brotherhood, brotherly relations, and so on.
Thank you.
So we are coming to close. I'm glad that two friends from outside India, one from New York, one from Chicago, Dr. Dennis Jorgen, and from New York, Puneet Chopra have joined. I thank you all. Thanks to Rasgotra sir, Galaxy Paki, I can't imagine we have more than 50 persons who have joined this program. And names are literally who is who. Normally, when I have this function hall in IIC or Habitat Center, I don't get so many people who have logged in. That is the magic of Ambassador Rasgotra. You have been Mahaguru and Ed using the phrase of His Holiness Dalai Lama. We are all your chelas. We have learned a trick or two from you all our life. We wish you good health, We wish you long life and continue inspiring us, guiding us. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to have this opportunity of talking with you from a distance, just looking at each other's photographs and some other friends who came online. Very good. Thank you very much.
Give us a virtual round of applause for Ambassador Rasgotra.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody who has taken trouble of joining us. Thank you. As usual, IFA has finished the program on dot in 1 hour. Good night.